Sorry I haven't uploaded in a while. I'm gonna be honest with you, Chief. I'm not doing well. But we stay silly. And the glasses aren't just for funsies. I also have a headache right now, so if I don't seem like fully in it, it's probably just because of the headache. But I'm going to do my best to deliver on the script that I have written. In better news, by the time this goes up, I will have read all the way through volume 4. So the no spoilers in the comments disclaimer applies to volumes 5 through 14. And as I've said before, I'm pretty good at like picking up on things and putting all the pieces together, so I don't want you to even like hint at anything that happens in the future. Even if you think you're being subtle, I don't want to risk anything. Okay, with all that out of the way, one of my initial thoughts picking this back up was that it's kind of hard to predict where the story is going. So not that I need to be able to do that right now, since this is only the first of 14 volumes, but I'm just not getting a sense of the bigger picture yet. Vash and Wolfwood are just traveling, encountering towns and people and getting into fights and moving on to the next thing. I mean, I guess the plot right now is figure out what Knives is going to do next and try to stop him, but that's not plot necessarily, that's just the goal. It's not a bad thing that I can't predict the trajectory of the story. The downside is that I don't feel like I have as much to say about this volume and how it connects to everything and the overarching themes compared to everything that was going on in the much more tightly plotted original TRIGUN. Unfortunately, this might be heavier on the summary side and lighter on the analysis side, but we'll see. To start off, Wolfwood rolls into a town that is being terrorized by one Vash the Stampede. And after a brief talk with the barkeep, he pretty clearly knows that this is not the real Vash on account of the terrorizing. But then who should enter the saloon but a very scruffy looking blonde man and a young girl, who are hounded by this fake Vash and his gang of henchmen. Wolfwood watches this man, whose name is Eric's, go outside the saloon to confront the gang in order to protect the girl because they were harassing her. And the fake Vash tells Eric's that if he strips and acts like a dog, he'll let him and the girl go. And Eric's obliges. And Wolfwood's suspicions of this scruffy blonde man are confirmed when he sees Eric's naked and can see his prosthetic arm and all of his scars. This is the real Vash. And despite Vash's compliance with the fake Vash's humiliation ritual, the gang shoots at him and they kidnap Lena, the girl, anyway. The real Vash gets rushed to a doctor because he got shot, but the surgeon notices that the bullets are making their way out of his flesh on their own. His body is like not healing itself, but rejecting the bullets, which I think that's a super neat, just bizarre, uncanny detail. There's a lot of pretty silly little sequences in here. I'm gonna enjoy the humor while it lasts, because I'm sure that we'll get less and less of it as time goes on. There's this incredibly goofy sequence of panels of Wolfwood slapping Vash to wake him up, and Vash waking up looking very beautiful. Wolfwood has been looking for Vash these entire 2 years, ever since he disappeared. And this entire time he's been carrying the gun that Vash left behind. And Vash once again takes up his gun, but he's reluctant to do so. Becoming Vash the Stampede again means leaving behind the life that he's built here and the people that he now calls home. And I think Vash probably knew that it wouldn't last. He mourns what he's losing, but he knows the loss was inevitable. That he would have been found eventually, or that Knives would resurface and he would have to go out to face him again. I think he was probably just intending to lie low for as long as it took him to recover, but then he stayed there because there was no imminent news of Knives, and for just a little while he could pretend to be a normal man and have a family and live a simple life. 2 years ago he had told Meryl that he couldn't afford to go into hiding when Knives was still out there, that he doesn't deserve to live a peaceful life when he still has a score to settle. He wouldn't be able to live with himself if he gives himself the privilege of a normal life, when he has this much greater responsibility as the only person on the planet who could stand a chance against Knives. He's changed his mind a little bit since the Fifth Moon incident because he is afraid of his own power. He's afraid of the danger that he poses to regular people because he doesn't understand his power, and Knives does, and that makes him a weapon in the hands of Knives. At this specific point in his life, it's safer for him and everyone else for him to stay in secrecy. But for good or for ill, that time is over. Because once his identity gets out, it's not safe for him to be around the townspeople in case they turn on him. And it's not safe for the townspeople in case knives or any of the gung-ho guns find him. So Vash and Wolfwood move out to rescue Lena. And it's funny because I don't have any of the older volumes on hand anymore because I had to return them to the library. So I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time that we see 3 of Wolfwood's most iconic traits: the sunglasses, the smoking, and the Punisher. Vash is surprised not by the ridiculousness of the weapon, but simply by the fact that Wolfwood is, as a priest, packing steel in the first place. Vash is immediately like, well, hey, we're not gonna kill anybody. And Wolfwood is like, huh? And Vash is like, my brother in Christ, you are literally a priest. 6th commandment, brother, thou shalt not kill. Which, oh, for me, resurfaced the old thou shalt not kill versus thou shalt not murder debate. And I'm not going to lay out all the points of a centuries-old theological debate for a YouTube video, but you probably already know what I think. And I also think it's very interesting that early Christian fathers, early church writers took a pretty firm thou shalt not kill stance, historically. But historicity aside, even in the modern age, typically clergy and doctors are, as people whose occupation it is to help heal the soul and the body, they often operate in this third space outside of a conflict and are exempt from warfare. Even culturally, to us in modern America, it hardly seems appropriate for a priest to be armed to the gills like that. But interestingly, Wolfwood acquiesces to Vash's request. And I have to wonder why. Just to get into Vash's good graces. Is it because he thinks maybe if he doesn't go along with what Vash wants, maybe Vash won't come along with him? Does he want to see if Vash's modus operandi has merit, if it works? Or is it simply because he likes Vash? Who knows? But together they non-lethally take out an entire gang of people and rescue Lena. And the real Vash shows up the fake Vash with some pretty impressive gunmanship. Vash, the real one, he does announce his name and his identity, so it's only a matter of time before word gets out. And there are some beautiful sections of prose in this manga. And normally when I think of manga, I don't immediately think of beautiful prose. But some of these little narration asides are just so evocative. So once again the wheel turns, the troublesome red-coated reaper in a wasteland of burning sand. The name carved into this planet's history still has a story to be told. I just think that's really lovely. So after they deal with all those guys, they go home to Lena and Granny's house and eat huge plates of spaghetti. It's so fun to just see them have a silly moment stuffing their faces and fighting over sausages. Something about still being able to eat and laugh, perhaps. Now that Vash has tied his long hair up, we can see that the bottom half or so of his hair is now dark. And I know that's important, but I don't really know why, so I'm just filing that away for later. I wonder if he grew out his hair, for one, so he looked different, but for two, like to help cover that up. I imagine it having a sudden change in your body like that would not be the most welcome experience, and so maybe he sort of wants to hide it. So as they're fighting over a piece of sausage, Wolfwood fills Vash in on what brought him here. 6 months ago, an entire town just completely disappeared. No bodies left, food still out on the table, and the only clue was the word knives scrawled into the town square. And as they're talking about knives, there's this panel. My jaw actually dropped the first time that I saw this. This goes so unbelievably hard. It reminds me of something, and I can't figure out what it is. It sort of looks like Lilith from Evangelion, what with the eyes and the like spikes going through it. But I don't think that's quite it. There's something else that it looks like that I just can't remember. So if you know where this came from or what inspired it or something else that looks like it, please put it in the comments, because this goes so crazy, but it also drives me crazy that I can't figure out why I feel like I recognize it. If they don't put him in this suit in Stampede, I'm suing, I'm rioting, I'm throwing a tantrum. Anyway, Vash is, if not suspicious of Wolfwood, he's at least curious as to why he knows so much about knives in the first place and why he cares to get to the bottom of this. And I as the reader am playing a constant game of like, how much do these guys each know about each other? I don't know if Vash knows that Wolfwood was at Knives' resurrection? And if he did see him there, does he remember? And Wolfwood has been affiliated with Knives and Legato, affiliated with them but not necessarily aligned with them. And I don't think he knows exactly what they are, or he didn't 2 years ago. Does he know now? Is he still on his Judas behavior and trying to bring Vash to Knives? Or is this for real? Or is it a little bit of both? Does he have yet to make that decision? I know that Vash knows that Wolfwood isn't honest with him, but how much does he know beyond that? Trouble is already brewing in the town because, as you can imagine, some of the townspeople are less than happy to learn that Vash the Stampede has been living under their noses for 2 years. And Vash knows that once word of him gets out, it's only a matter of time before he's hunted again, and the townspeople will be the ones to pay the price. He has no choice but to leave, even if he wants to stay. And Granny and Lena, his family, Granny's not happy that he's leaving, and Lena is a mess. She was the one who found him bloody and broken in an alleyway somewhere. And she was only 10 at the time, but she took him home to Granny and they fixed him up. Even though Vash is the one keeping Lena safe right now, she sees herself as his protector. She showed him mercy and care when he was at his lowest. There's a list of 6 works of mercy given in the Gospel of Matthew. To feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, and visit the imprisoned. And Lena and Granny did at least 5 of those. And as I was thinking about the works of mercy, I remembered this other passage. Hebrews 13:2 says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it." That's exactly what Lena and Granny did. That's exactly what happened. Now, the point of the verse is it's not just saying you have to be kind to people, because what if one of them is secretly an angel and you weren't kind to them and you mistreated God's messenger? I guess, yeah, that could be it. But I think it's mostly to say that the way that you treat the stranger in need is how you treat all of the people of God. In the same passage as the list of works of mercy, Jesus himself said, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me." And the hypothetical audience says, when did we do that? When did we, I didn't see you. But his reply is that whatever you do to the very least of people, you have done that unto me. I think that mercy is one of the most forsaken and even despised virtues. No one wants to be merciful. Everyone wants to get what they deserve and give what they think someone else deserves and scoff at mercy. But mercy and grace and forgiveness are kind of some of the main things that Jesus talked about doing. All right, back to the story. We get this really beautiful montage of Lena cutting Vash's hair. Images of the time they've spent together are spliced in between the snips of the scissors. We see her nursing Vash back to health, them doing chores together, Vash showing off his arm, them celebrating Lena's birthday. It's just one single page, but it's so beautiful. And before he ultimately leaves, Vash thanks Lena for protecting him, which I think is what she needed and wanted to hear all along. He recognizes and affirms the way that she feels, which, having been a young preteen myself once, I think that's exactly what Lena needed to hear. And I really hope Vash gets to see Lena again. I hope that these 2 chapters aren't the only time that they get to spend together, because leaving family is one of the hardest experiences in life, especially if it's not your biological family. Well, at least for me, there's an inevitability that draws bio families back together. Like when I say goodbye to my sister, even if I'm not going to see her for several months, I know that I'm going to see her again. When I had to say goodbye to the people I lived with and ate with and cried with and slept near for many years, people that functionally were my family, knowing we would never share the life that we used to have again, and despite all that we had shared, it was very likely that we would, from this point on, just become a was in each other's lives. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every day I wonder if we could have done things differently. If we could have chosen each other over choosing jobs and families and partners and convinced each other to stay and moved on together instead of apart. It's hard not to think about what could have been. And Vash is so desperate for family. He's still so full of unbearable grief and loneliness. He has lost his mom and his twin brother in such horrendous ways, and I don't think he's really processed any of it. I said in a different video that Vash is just searching for people to love. He's always kind to the people that he meets in passing, but that's different from having a family. That's different from the long-term love that comes from relationships that you spend time building, that comes from living alongside someone, knowing someone and trusting them and being able to give and to receive and to laugh and to care for them in reciprocity. And I also get the feeling that Vash prefers friendships with women and children. Also, he likes to spend time with kids. We see that with Kite, and all the times that he's just playing with random kids in the street. But mostly his tightest relationships are all with women. 3 volumes in, and Wolfwood is really his only close male relationship, and most of that, at least so far, is Wolfwood pursuing after Vash. I don't know if Vash really cares for Wolfwood yet. He hasn't let his guard down around him. But what's so cool about Vash's relationships with women is that for most male protagonists, the only women in their lives are a mother and a romantic partner. And aside from Rem, all of Vash's relationships with women fall outside of those 2 reductive categories. Not that having a mother or a partner is like bad, but there's such a wide variety in the types of relationships that Vash has with women. You have Millie and Meryl and Rem and Lena and Granny and his sister plants and Luda and Rosa in Stampede. And I'm not far enough into the story to be able to like have insight into this or like write an essay about it. You know, I have to see where these relationships develop. But when I get more into the story, I really want to delve into the rich variety of Vash's relationships with women. I don't know, maybe he just feels more comfortable and safe around women, which is real. Okay, so one of the guys from the gang earlier, the specific man who was harassing Lena, finds Vash at Granny and Lena's house and threatens to blow the whole place away with his arm cannon thingy. And when he fires it at Vash kicks the shell, the rocket thing, the projectile. He kicks it away and holds the man at gunpoint. And, well, if you can even call him a man, he looks like a melting ice cream cone with a mohawk. And I mean, there's been some goofy looking guys in this manga before, but this one particular guy looks so stylistically out of place. Anyway, this dude is rightfully terrified of Vash, and Vash charges him to protect the town while he's gone. And if he doesn't protect the town after Vash leaves, Vash will personally hunt him down and send him to hell. And so the guy runs away. And yeah, I don't know, man. This did not exactly age well. Maybe it's not that it aged poorly. Maybe it's that it also felt equally weird 20 years ago. But it's like, that's not how this works. This guy was sexually harassing a preteen girl, a child. I fail to see any universe where a threat from some guy who, no matter how scary he is, just said he's going to be leaving town, would be enough to scare this creep out of that kind of behavior. But if I'm Vash, I would never in my life leave Lena and Granny within a 30-mile radius of this guy, especially when he knows where they live and he knows that Vash isn't there anymore. I don't know. I mean, maybe if I can suspend my disbelief about literally everything that happens in this manga, maybe I can suspend my disbelief that this creep would be so scared of Vash that he would stop targeting a literal child. But I don't know, man. It just made me feel icky. But let's go somewhere much better. The insurance girls. Millie, no, not Millie. What's her name? Meryl. Girl, it literally says Meryl in the script. I don't know why I can't read. Meryl celebrates her 23rd birthday, which is insane because that means she was only 21 when everything went down prior. And she's about to leave for her fun little birthday vacation when her boss calls her in to identify an alleged photograph of Vash. And she's like, yeah, that looks like him. But since she's going on vacation, another man is assigned to Vash's case. And one of her coworkers mentions that that man who is assigned to Vash's case is former military. And that trips a bunch of alarm bells in Meryl's head. And this man is able to locate Vash very quickly and start a shootout in the middle of the hotel that he's staying at. Vash gets shot. When is he not getting shot? Wolfwood dives in there and gets Vash out. And with the combined power of Meryl's feigned female helplessness and Millie's giant stun gun, the girls are able to ambush the hitman and get him pretty good. His face is all like messed up from Millie's stun gun. And he's sent to the same hospital that Vash is being treated at. And when Wolfwood hears this, He finds him in the hospital and he dumps Tabasco in the guy's open face wound. It's another one of those fantastically funny panels that I'm choosing to relish while I can still get them. But the girls don't even stick around to see Vash. They just resume their vacation and go on their merry way. And honestly, good for them. We move on to a new town, and Wolfwood walks past this guy building just like heaps and heaps of coffins. He returns to the hotel room where Vash has been working out, practicing his blindfolded marksmanship. This, I think, is these are my favorite panels in the whole volume. Me when my sisters get back from a workout. So after Wolfwood dies from the fumes, he explains to Vash what he heard from the coffin man. This town is at war with itself over a plant that was excavated about a year ago. And Vash is overjoyed to hear that there's a plant that is still alive after 150 years of being abandoned in some wreckage somewhere. His face when he hears the news is just shining and beautiful and hopeful. But he starts to cry when he hears just how brutal the fighting over this plant has become. And it sucks because this thing should be able to provide resources for this entire town, and it should make survival easier, but because of humanity's greed, it had the opposite effect. It started with 2 families, and eventually everybody got roped into the conflict and chose a side, and Wolfwood says each time the body count grew, and each time the other side would retaliate and raise the stakes. It's just a cycle that's almost impossible to stop once you start. It's not just a cycle of violence, but a cycle of revenge, with each side kicking it into higher and higher gear. That's the nature of revenge. Someone out for revenge isn't looking for justice. They're just looking for retaliation. Rarely is it any sort of equivalency, not really an eye for an eye, but a life for an eye. And the reason Vash and Wolfwood are in this town in the first place is because Vash has arranged to meet someone here. Wolfwood is kind of pissed that Vash won't tell him who. But Vash says, hey, I don't have to tell you my business. I know you're keeping things from me too. Like I said earlier, still trying to figure out how much each of them knows about the other. Because I think that their alliance right now is still fairly uneasy. Very important panel. Vash is drinking tea out of a smiley face mug. So Vash's appointment arrives on the sand steamer and is a pair of men from Vash's hometown, which I am assuming is just the manga equivalent of Stampede's Ship 3. Because it's similar in concept and we see some similar faces. I don't know if the ship or the society has a name in the manga though. I don't think I've come across it yet. But one of the men is an old mentor figure known simply as Sensei, and the other one is Brad. But our manga Brad is a very young and brash man, and definitely not the paternal sort of Brad we see in Stampede. I feel like maybe they decided to merge these characters for Stampede, but Brad seems rather appalled by the tough outside world, which indicates to me that the people of the ship's society live in relative safety and peace, and that relative safety and peace is possible on this godforsaken planet. I assume it's because they have the technology and or plants and resources to be able to live well, but it also seems like they're very secretive and isolated, and either don't have enough to share with the rest of the world or can't in order to keep that tech and those plants and themselves safe from knives. So Sensei and Brad deliver Vash some new equipment, and it turns out his leather gear is actually a temperature regulatory system, like a still suit from Dune, and it's bulletproof. Even without this confirmation, I would have assumed that his suit had special properties, because ain't no way he's wearing skin-tight leather in the desert. You will die if you do that. Sensei asks Vash about the Fifth Moon incident, and I was surprised to learn that Vash's second use of his angel arm didn't wipe his memory completely. If I remember correctly, July was 8 years before the current time, and that wiped his mind completely. He doesn't remember anything from before. I don't know if that means from before, from around the time of the incident, or anything at all, because that would mean that his constant flashbacks to knives and Rem are him regaining memories. That wasn't in my script, I just thought of that right now. But he's able to remember fragments from the incident 2 years ago. He says he remembers Knives' hand reaching for him, and he remembers that he was the one that put the hole in the moon. And he says that Knives knows things about his body that he himself doesn't know, which is such a terrifying way of putting it. And I have to wonder, how does Knives know these things? Is it because he's been in cahoots with the seeds doctor who knows stuff about plants? Or maybe he's read Tesla's files and knows stuff about himself and Vash because of the experiments that were done to her. Or maybe it's just because Knives has never been afraid of his own power, and so he's not afraid to experiment and push the limits of what he can do, and he knows Vash's body simply because he also knows his own. But Brad is genuinely scared of Vash. He can see how non-human Vash is, especially because Brad met him once when he was only 4, and this is like well over a decade later, and Vash still looks exactly the same. And all this talk of July and the 5th moon incident, you know, Vash isn't denying that he was the one responsible for those things. And so in Brad's eyes, Vash poses a serious threat to all of humanity. Sensei says that man there is the only thing standing between Knives and our complete annihilation. The one who cannot leave, who even comes back from the dead to stand against Knives, is Vash. And Vash just asks Brad to trust him. So even if it's a risk, and even if Vash is terrifying, he's all that they've got. There's a commotion, there's a ruckus happening as Sensei is working on Vash's arm. Fantastic panel, by the way. An armored vehicle just rammed into the sand steamer that's outside of town. There's a huge crowd of townspeople gathering to see what's going on, including Wolfwood, who is just posted up eating a bowl of ramen or something. There's a contingent of federal troops in town. They don't explain for what reason, and they don't explain the federal troops at all. And I have so many questions about that, because the existence of federal troops implies the existence of some kind of central government. And I kind of thought that each of the major cities functioned maybe more as a city-state, or had, you know, jurisdiction of the towns around it. But the fact that there's federal troops means that there's some centralization of power on this planet, enough to have a standing military. Maybe they're just military police instead of a real military, because who's the military going to be fighting? They're not going to go to war with other countries. There's only one country. In Stampede, July was the functional capital of the world because it controlled the most water. I don't know if MANGA July is the same. I don't know if it was the capital and then it was destroyed and then capital resources sort of just got shifted somewhere else, or if there's a different city that's been functioning as like a centralization of power. And if there is, and this town has been at war with itself for like an entire year, and these murders and assaults are continually escalating, why haven't the federal troops stepped in sooner to try and quell the fighting? Is the existence of federal troops in TRIGUN a plot hole? Does this ever come up again? But anyway, these federal troops of questionable existence have the steamer surrounded and are attempting negotiation with these hijackers first. And Vash is getting ready to go in there and do what he can to stop the fighting and save people. But Wolfwood stops him like, what do you think you're doing? You're gonna get yourself killed. And here's where we get our first peek into the zero-sum way that Wolfwood sees the world. To him, life is conflict. You have to make quick and sometimes cruel decisions in order to stay alive. And the worst thing to do is to not make a choice, or to vacillate between choices and ultimately do nothing, because then everybody dies. He says, if you can't kill anyone, you can't save anyone. Heard that one before. And since we aren't omniscient like God, sometimes we have to choose to become demons. A very interesting thing for a priest to say. Vash is, people already see him as a demon. What has he got to lose? And his response, with a very serious face on, this might be the most serious we've seen him this volume, says, thank you for your words, Wolfwood, but I'm not standing by and doing nothing. People are dying over there, or at risk of dying, and I'm going to go in and save as many as I can. Wolfwood makes the rookie mistake that not fighting or not killing is the same as doing nothing. I think Vash and I would agree with him that you can't not make a choice, but Vash has made a choice. And just because he's not killing doesn't mean that he's a useless bystander. He's maybe the one person that can go in there and take a beating and take bullets and come out okay. So why not? Why shouldn't he go and do that if it means that people will be saved? He's gonna go in there and sacrifice his safety and his body to make sure that the least amount of people die. And even if you don't agree with that method or that philosophy, you can't say that he's not doing anything, but that he's not making a choice. And he gets onto the steamer, but the room with the hostages only has one entrance, and the men inside know that he's coming. The head honcho of this siege is actually a puppet that is being controlled by number 4 of the gung-ho guns. And I have so many questions. Has this puppet been there since the beginning? Was this entire conflict manufactured by the gung-ho guns, pulling strings to cause infighting among the people of this town? One of the guys is like, wow, our leader is so cool and collected all the time. He never even breaks a sweat. Girl, he's a puppet. But also that tells me that this puppet man is not a new addition to the operation. He's been involved in this for a while. And there's probably more to this conflict than meets the eye. Because I think it's not just people fighting over resources. It's people being goaded into hating their fellow men by an outsider. Whether or not the gung-ho guns started this conflict, I think you can't deny that they are instrumental in escalating it. Knives will be like, oh, humanity is so corrupt and evil, which is true to a degree. But like, bro, you are going out of your way to make it eviler. Like, maybe if you weren't evil on purpose, the world wouldn't be so bad. I don't know. Anyway, Vash asks the puppet man, whom he doesn't know is a puppet man. Nobody knows. But he says, hey, do you want to talk this out like grown-ups, or do you want to get sent to the hospital? And then puppet man is like, do you want to be shot in the back or in the front? And Vash is like, okay, nice negotiations, and shoots all the overhead compartments so that all the luggage and crates squash everybody. And there's only one guy left of these hijackers. And we've seen him throughout this situation, looking very desperate and sweaty and nervous this whole time. And he's got his gun to one of the hostages' heads very aggressively. There were at least 3 people being held hostage, but for the sake of this scenario right now, the one guy is the only one that really matters. And Vash is trying to get him to stand down and let the hostage go, but he refuses and is only getting more and more riled up by this whole situation until he screams that the man at the end of his gun is the man who killed his daughter. And that gives Vash pause. He freezes and thinks of Rem and thinks of Knives and slowly lowers his gun away from this man and the hostage. The hostage begs not to be killed, but that only insults the girl's father even more. Why should he show any mercy to this guy who showed no mercy to his daughter? And it wasn't just this man and the fact that this man killed his daughter, but it was a whole bunch of men, and they tortured her and did horrible things to her before they killed her. And it's an awful scene because at first you're with Vash, like, hey, maybe don't execute this hostage in cold blood. And then the man says what this other man did to his daughter, and then you're not so much on Vash's side anymore. I mean, Vash isn't even on that side. The hostage is screaming, crying, throwing up, begging not to be executed. And Vash is frozen, but he knows. He knows he has to move. He told Wolfwood he's not willing to stand by and let things happen. He's a man that makes choices. He's not a bystander. So he grabs the man's gun and makes him fire into the floor. And the man attacks Vash for interfering and hits him in the face, but even though Vash is half knocked out, he doesn't take his hand off of the other man's gun. The hostage, in begging for his life, calls out for his dad, and the girl's father is stricken by this and puts the gun back to the hostage's head with even more force, with Vash's hand still on the gun. And we cut away, hard cut, to the feds saying 13 hijackers and 1 interloper were taken into custody. Then we see that the man who was a hostage is being taken out, and he's alive. Vash's narration tells us that in the end, the girl's father couldn't do it. And although it may look like weakness, that it may be weakness, who's to say? But that weakness, or that perceived weakness, saved both that other man and Vash. And what's crazy is that it's not actually that Vash's physical interference stopped the man from killing him. The man actually made his own decision not to kill him. It was the man's choice. I don't know, that almost makes things even harder to process. It's not that the man saw Vash's point and conceded and was like, okay, I won't do it because I won't continue the cycle of violence. It's not that he found mercy in his heart to spare this other man. It's just that he couldn't bring himself to do it. But no matter his reasoning or intention, through Vash's intervention, he was able to prevent more bloodshed this time. And maybe because it worked this time, it'll work again the next time. Someone else will be able to step in and stop the killing. And maybe dismantling the cycle of violence starts with sparing one awful man at a time. And I think that what the story is saying goes way beyond just, is Vash good for not killing this guy, or bad for not killing this guy? Or is Vash right for not wanting to kill this guy, or wrong for not wanting to kill this guy? I think it even goes beyond, okay, Vash is good for sticking to his morals, or Vash is bad for trying to force his morals on someone who might not share them. I don't think that the story is asking you to make a value judgment on Vash and his actions. It's asking way bigger questions than that. That's what all good stories do. They don't provide answers. They raise questions and force you to look at them. And here's some of the questions. You were probably rooting for this hostage to live until you found out what he did. How does that make you feel? And no amount of good can make up for such horrific evil. Does every man deserve to be defined by his worst deeds? We are told that murders and rapes have been increasing in this town on both sides. Is the man with the finger on the trigger any better than the man at the other end of the barrel? How did things escalate to this insane degree in the first place? How did we let this happen? As Wolfwood says, even those who normally wouldn't fight will pick up a gun when their loved ones are killed. But then when does it end? Not killing this man doesn't mean not punishing him or just letting him walk free. So we have to ask, are there alternative ways to bring justice without the finality of death? This fight isn't even about the plant resources anymore. How many more men must be shot? How many more daughters must be killed? Someone has to try to bring this to an end, or it's only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Every time they up the ante, and every time they regret the outcome. So what's the answer? How do you live in a world like that? Do you let yourself be taken advantage of? Do you retaliate and get caught in this endless cycle of unchecked violence that's going to not only affect you, but your family and your loved ones and your kids? How do we effectively restrain our innate violent and angry impulses as humans? How do you practice conflict resolution in a peaceful way? You have to be willing to sacrifice something. There is no conflict resolution without some degree of sacrifice or compromise. What's the answer? Do you run away? Can you leave? Could you leave if you wanted to? Is there a separate authority, a neutral third party, to help arbitrate a conflict? Can people from both sides agree to meet and talk themselves back down to peace? Or is there a tipping point that there's no going back from? A whole paragraph of questions from this one scene, and I don't have any answers, but the questions are still worth asking, worth thinking about. So, in the aftermath, Sensei and Brad watch the hijackers and Vash, whose face is beaten bloody, as they're taken into custody, and Brad just wonders, what was all of that for? Vash, getting so hurt at the expense of some man who did not deserve mercy. Sensei says it was to prevent more bloodshed from happening this time around. But he also says that if Brad had been the one in there, Sensei, would have gone in to save him because they're family. And it's the same for Vash. Every human being is his family. He doesn't want to see them dead. He wants to see them grow and learn and change their ways. So in the middle of the night, Wolfwood busts Vash out of jail on a motorcycle and offers a ride out of town into relative safety to the father of the girl who was, as one of the hijackers, in jail with Vash, which is a wonderful gesture from Wolfwood. But Wolfwood warns Vash that one of these days his middle ground method won't work and he'll be forced to choose a side. Many are saying this, and I can't help but feel a huge sense of foreboding that Vash will have an enormous choice to make that he might not be prepared to face. And I can't predict what it's going to be at this point, other than the fact that it'll be some insane, drastic life or death situation. But he's in those all the time. So it must be something really, really, really crazy in order to be so heavily foreshadowed. Wolfwood calls Vash an optimist. I don't agree with him on that in the slightest. I really don't think Vash goes into these situations thinking that everything's going to turn out sunshine and rainbows and that things will just work out okay. He saved people this time, but it was hard. It was hard for him to do it, and it was hard for the men involved. Vash, of all people, knows how unkind men can be, but he still chooses to try to save them. That's not optimism. I think that's something else entirely. Mercy, unconditional love, something like that. And just because saving people without killing them doesn't always work, it doesn't mean Vash has to give up trying. And in the final pages, the puppet master guy returns to Legato to tell him that Vash is back. And that's the end. So what do we think? Trigun, as usual, pulls no punches. And I think, as uncomfortable as parts of it might be, I think it's really important to learn how to be uncomfortable instead of just shying away from things. It's important to interrogate those things and ask as many questions as you can of the text. Asking questions of the text is not asking, why did they do it this way? This makes me uncomfortable. I wish they did it this other way so that things are cleaner. But rather reading the way that the text handles things and hearing what questions it's raising in itself and what it's asking you. Much to think about. See you next time for Volume 2. These manga videos take a long time for me to produce because I'm a terrible script writer. I hate writing scripts. So my next video is probably not gonna be a manga review, just to ease my writing load. I have a short non-Trigun video essay in the works, so maybe it'll be that next.